as the title says, blowing the whistle on big oil, and surprisingly how it seems to have changed my life for the better. How on earth did someone like myself become involved with someone like Shell? Because I wasn't an obvious candidate, trust me. My parents had very, very left-leaning views and actions when I was growing up as a child, and I certainly wasn't thinking I would get into bed with these people. But this is basically what happened. So on the 20th of April 2010, there was a massive explosion from the Deepwater Horizon oil rig, which caused the biggest accidental oil spill in history. 11 people lost their lives on that rig, and 200 million barrels of oil were spilled into the Gulf of Mexico for months and months. And I don't know if you remember that spill, but I do remember it at the time, and I was absolutely horrified by what I was seeing, the images coming back from the Gulf of Mexico. You know, seeing all those marine wildlife with just oil cloying to them, tragic as well for the coastal communities that had to deal with the mess, and also BP's reputation, right? That was BP. Their reputation was in tatters, rightly so. They were the operators of that rig, and they did face criminal proceedings. They admitted to 11 counts of manslaughter, and the cleanup took them years and cost them $65 billion. I didn't know it at that time, back in 2010, but that incident, it sent a massive shockwave through the fossil fuel industry. A reminder that this is really risky business, and when things go wrong, they go wrong big style with catastrophic consequences for people and environments. And then in the aftermath of that disaster, I was contacted by a management consultancy out of the blue, very bizarrely, who said, "We're working with Shell to try and stop large explosions. Can you write a survey for us?" Bit unexpected, I have to say. And I knew practically nothing about oil and gas engineering, but I was a researcher and consultant, so you can get up to speed quite quickly and rely on their expertise. But that wasn't really the problem. The problem was, shit, this is Shell. I knew about their terrible record of pollution in the Niger Delta in Nigeria, particularly about the way they treated the Ogoni land and Ogoni people. And I also knew about Shell's alleged involvement with the execution of 9 community and environmental activists, peaceful activists, that were calling for fairness and just better managed operations in the Niger Delta. They were fearful that Shell were actually creating the conditions that would lead to the Ogoni people actually becoming extinct. So I was aware of that. I was aware of the Ogoni 9. So exciting kind of career challenge on the one hand, but, a reluctance to take the dirty dollar. I saw it as dirty dollar on the other. So, yeah, a big dilemma. But after a number of discussions with Shell, I guess I became convinced that they were genuinely committed to making improvements to their safety performance across the globe, actually. And they had a safety ambition called Goal Zero. No harm to people and no leaks. Sounds great, right? Honourable, ambitious. And they told me that it is achievable. That is achievable. You can have 0 incidents, 0 harm to people, no leaks, if you put in the right strategy, the right resources, you can make that happen. So, admittedly, I was convinced, I was pretty excited at the opportunity to work with them, because I thought I could change the industry. I thought this was a real chance to prevent more pollution, more harm to people, and actually avoid another Deepwater Horizon. So that seemed pretty irresistible, I have to say. And so I stepped in, and I guess what I did was step inside the belly of the beast. And it was great work. And I met and worked with some really good-hearted and talented people. So we designed a safety culture survey that would genuinely empower workers to honestly and anonymously be able to express their views about safety, performance and safety culture. We had really hard measures, we had really rigorous analytics, and I have to say I was amazed that Shell would allow that, actually. You know, that they would want to know the real, the dirty inside of their, at the dark end of the factory or the production unit, where most people and most managers simply don't go. So I actually thought it was pretty pioneering and pretty brave of them to do that. I mean, they didn't know my background, and if they had, I don't think I would have got the gig. But yeah, I was actually quite impressed that they went along with this. And over the 10 years, we surveyed well over 20,000 workers and contractors across their global operations. And from the very beginning, actually, Shell Nigeria were probably the most keen to have this safety culture assessment, because they knew that improvements there were absolutely desperately needed. You know, so a bit of background. Shell have been operating in the Niger Delta since 1956, and the continuous gas flaring and oil spills and leaks have caused the land, air, and water to, you know, be absolutely devastated, causing hardship for people and the environment. They've basically created a kind of sacrifice zone there. People can't fish, they can't farm. And I would say this, you know, imagine turning on your kitchen tap and what you get out of it is filthy, oily liquid instead of clean water, because that is what Shell have done to the Niger Delta. That is what life is like there. And incredibly, the same year that Deepwater Horizon happened, there was a spill the size of Belgium from this vessel, Bonga, FPSO Bonga, which is a floating production, storage and offloading vessel owned by Shell Nigeria. That didn't make the headlines, that's for sure. And what is incredible is I surveyed Bonga 4 times in 10 years, and I never heard a single person mention this spill. I surveyed that place in 2012, just 1 year, maybe even just 6 months after that spill, and no one ever talked about it. It was quite incredible. They talked about other problems with Bonga, plenty of them, but that incident, not a whisper. And I was really astonished. I only found out about it 4 months ago when I was contacted by a legal firm in Britain who are actively bringing cases against Shell on behalf of the people affected by that. And I was astounded. I was absolutely astounded to learn that that had happened. And those people are they're still seeking justice. They're actually at the moment going through a process where they are asking the court to even hear their case because it's been so long since that happened. So just like the Ogoni people, they are just seeking some justice. And over the years, working with Shell, I started to notice that there was a relationship between market conditions, let's say the oil price, and the amount of effort going in to safety versus the amount of effort going into production and profits. And for example, you can see that, so in 2016, there was a major oil price crash. We hadn't seen anything like it for quite some time. And that really did have an effect, I believe. And in those periods, workers raised many concerns across locations and time. So, for example, resources absolutely stretched to breaking point, unsafe levels of production pressure, neglected maintenance, substandard PPE, and contractors who would go unpaid for months and months. Honestly, I would read the comments that people used to type into the survey, and I would weep. I would absolutely weep. And some nights I would have nightmares because the things that they were saying, you know, I go offshore, it's a ticking time bomb. You know, I'm really worried. People are being potentially worked to death. I had one message one time from someone just literally saying, from a contractor, please, sir, please sir, can you help us because we haven't been paid and I can't feed my family. But anyway, I'd report back to the kind of facilities leadership, and they would try their best to make improvements, but the required resources to really fix the problems could only come from the very top of the house, so very senior management. And of course, as we might expect, their bonuses were driven by production and profits and not by safety performance, despite their ambition of goal zero, no harm to people and no leaks. And it started to feel like that shockwave from Deepwater Horizon, that was on the wane. And I would say that complacency, that's being kind, complacency was starting to really creep in. And I also started to notice that the surveys weren't just being used for safety improvement. It looked like they were being used as a kind of decision-making tool for asset dumping. So by that I mean kind of deliberately selling off operations because they're not profitable enough. These were often neglected places, so they'd have bad survey results. They were clearly neglected places and places where workers often felt afraid and actually even scared to speak up. And I didn't like that because that wasn't the purpose of the surveys. I understood the purpose of us doing these safety culture assessments was to make improvements, not to help Shell decide which assets they needed to palm off, usually to a local supplier. So time moves on, and it's now 2015, and the world has started to talk about global warming and ecological issues. So I joined the Green Party and became an active campaigner. And we had successes. This was our first Green Party win in Weymouth in November 2015, from a by-election. And I know that must seem like a really odd choice, right? So I'm doing this job, and now I've joined the Green Party. But I would rationalise it. I would tell myself, hey, I'm doing good. I'm helping people to stay safe and prevent more pollution. And the people around me, they'd go, yeah, you don't need to feel bad about it. Oh, and we've got someone on the inside, so that's quite interesting. So it kind of kept me in, but I was feeling increasingly conflicted. And the next few years, I really started to feel a growing sense of urgency around the environmental crises. And probably, like several people in this room, I attended a Heading for Extinction talk by Extinction Rebellion in Dorchester. It was crowded out. There was like 250 people showed up for a room that would only take 200. And I thought I knew something about climate change. I thought that I was the kind of person who was aware of environmental issues and the threats to wildlife. But I sat for 2 hours through that talk, and I just felt like I'd known absolutely nothing. And I was just so shocked by the reality of the science and just how close to failure we were, basically. And now I knew the causes. Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere being a big one, and I knew who was causing that because I was working for them. So by now, and it's 2019, I was convinced that Shell were instrumental in accelerating environmental collapse, and working with them was becoming increasingly difficult to square away with my conscience and my values. But it was just as hard to give up because I absolutely loved my job and felt a need to listen to workers and to try and help them to feel safer and to improve safety performance. So my new narrative was the fossil fuel industry workers deserve a safe transition to the new energy future. I could make myself feel better with that, but of course that's only true if you really believe that the industry is actually transitioning. So, what changed? What were the last straws? Well, in the summer of 2021, Shell Nigeria asked me to conduct another set of surveys across all of their remaining facilities. They had actually just sold off about half of them for all the reasons that I mentioned earlier, not profitable enough, etc. And yeah, I thought, yeah, okay, I know this might be the last time I maybe do this, but yeah, you know, those people, they deserve to have their voice heard. But once we got started, Shell Nigeria told me that they wanted me to redesign the survey so that they could use it for their new under construction extraction projects. So I was like, what new? What new expansion and extraction projects? And they were like, oh yeah, we've got about a dozen of them. So I was absolutely gutted to hear that. Honestly, I had convinced myself that this wasn't actually happening in Nigeria. And I just realised from that moment on that this wasn't a transition, this was an expansion, meaning more oil and gas, more CO2, and also more trouble for the Niger Delta. I committed to the project, but I made up my mind that this was the last time that I would work for them. Because as much as I did love my job, I just couldn't do that anymore. And as that project, that final project, moved to a close in January 2022, I started to think about how could I leave and somehow make it meaningful. I wasn't sure how I was going to do that, but I thought, I know, I want to have some impact here. Sorry. And then, quite incredibly, one day, I saw some live stream footage of an Extinction Rebellion truth teller action, which was going on in Shell's global headquarters in London. And I saw a protester, literally with one hand glued to the reception desk, and in the other one, he held a poster that said, "Whistle blow for the planet, insiders wanted." And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. I wanted to quit publicly and with purpose. So I contacted the Truth Teller team and thought, yeah, let's meet up and discuss how I could somehow have a public resignation. So we formed a Shexit plan. We were going to produce a video, and we would use the LinkedIn professional social media platform to post the resignation, because we thought, actually, you know, we could get traction in the business world, and we could maybe reach oil and gas workers. And we set a date for the 23rd of May. And on that morning, I took a massive leap of faith into the unknown. I knew I was about to lose my biggest client and the biggest revenue stream that I had, but to be honest, that was the least thing that was at stake. I was braced for legal action from Shell, maybe something worse, and potential backlash from media and public if the message even got out there and reached anybody. And I have to say, I felt sad more than scared. Sad because I knew I was about to turn my back on thousands of people at Shell who I had spent 10 years convincing to trust me with their innermost thoughts about their safety and welfare in their workplace. And I just felt like I was about to massively betray them, abandon them, and potentially silence them. But I thought, you know, whatever happens, happens. I'm ready for all the consequences. So I posted the video and I emailed my resignation to the CEO, the executive committee, and around 1,400 employees.
My name is Caroline Dennett, and this is my resignation. I've worked with Shell for over 10 years now, empowering tens of thousands of workers to improve safety culture at their work sites, trying to keep people safe, prevent oil and gas leaks and major incidents like the Deepwater Horizon disaster in the Gulf of Mexico. But today I'm quitting because of Shell's double talk on climate. Shell's stated safety ambition is to do no harm. It's called Goal Zero, and it sounds honourable, but they are completely failing on it. They know that continued oil and gas extraction causes extreme harms. to our climate, to our environment, and to people. And whatever they say, Shell is simply not winding down on fossil fuels. They're expanding with new exploration and extraction projects against the clear warnings from scientists and dismissing the huge risks from climate change. And I just can't be a part of this anymore. I know I'm privileged to be able to make this choice, and many people working in fossil fuel companies just aren't so lucky. But the fossil fuel industry, it's the past. And if you can find a way out, then please walk away while there's still time. Do it now.
The LinkedIn post went viral, and the media attention was far, far bigger than we ever thought was possible. From Seattle to New Zealand and everywhere in between, the story was picked up by the press and just kept spreading for days and weeks, and it was incredibly seen by millions. And instead of a barrage of hate mail and questions about my sanity and shitograms that you might expect from doing that, I was met with a sort of global embrace, I guess, because the public response was overwhelmingly positive, and I just had thousands of supportive messages. And on top of that, I discovered there was a whole community of people that I never knew existed on LinkedIn in the professional arena. And I guess they were kind of corporate activists. I just was never aware of them. And I heard from hundreds of people who wanted to have a conversation about how to change business practices and business culture and limit business impact on the environment. Then there were others who had already quit and some who wanted to. But interestingly, still to this day, I've never heard a peep out of Shell. No gagging order, no lawsuit, no nasty surprises so far. The whole experience has been entirely positive. I have connected with some incredible people and literally life-changing projects. I have gone from feeling utter despair about the state of the planet to genuine hope that we can not only survive, but thrive. So, in May this year, I decided to give Shell another prod. And I was invited by Fossil Free London to go to their investor AGM in London. And I decided that rather than get in the crowd and sing and storm the stage, which was brilliant, by the way, I could have more impact by just facing out the board and asking them some questions. So I did that. I presented a case to them about their past harms in the Niger Delta, and from the past until now, their continued devastation of that area. So yeah, I stood before the CEO, Wael Sawan, and the chairman, Sir Andrew Mackenzie, and gave them a 10-minute rundown of their catastrophic operations in the Niger Delta. And from that last survey that I did, I presented to them some of the key facts of that. And these were them. 40% said that they didn't think that their operations had enough people to actually operate safely. There is an entire third of people who say they're just putting safety first, they're not managing their maintenance at all, it's neglected or delayed, and another third almost don't trust management to address their safety concerns promptly. And you can see there, these was a couple of the quotes. Actually, someone saying that they knew of 2 people who had died on the job, basically, because they'd been worked to death. And that the reduced manpower and increased workload is basically a recipe for disaster. And what they mean is the kind of disaster that we saw either from Bonga or from Deepwater Horizon. So they did listen, which was quite surprising. They didn't try and shut me up or oust me out. Also, unbeknown to me, they were live streaming the AGM, so I feel completely at liberty to share this with you because they've already shared it with the public. But basically, I wanted to ask them, will you now at least commit the necessary finances to sort all these problems out, to prevent extensive leaks and spills in the Niger Delta, with all the incumbent harms from that. Loss of livelihoods, loss of life, loss of nature, and loss of ecosystems. To which Whale Sawan replied, "It is a location that we've recognised a couple of years ago that the risk-reward ratio to operate is no longer tolerable when it comes to onshore Nigeria." Now, if we interpret that in normal language, that is basically this. We've made a complete mess and we're walking away from the Niger Delta because we can't squeeze any more profit out of it, and frankly, we don't give a toss about it anyway. And that's really, really how they perceive it. So, we started the talk with the Deepwater Horizon disaster, and like Deepwater, the whole oil and gas industry is built on foundations that are extremely costly to maintain. The entire industry's disregard for people and planet seems unstoppable, but I would argue they are unstoppable. In fact, I would say that they are not even viable because their business model is fundamentally flawed, and I'll explain why I make that claim in a moment. So despite making $195 billion last year, the big five oil companies are only viable because they are supported by three artificial pillars. Firstly, massive government subsidies, basically free money taken from us, the taxpayer, and given straight to them. And according to the International Monetary Fund, they've just updated the figures because you've probably heard $1 trillion being pushed around, but they actually say it is now $7 trillion. $7 trillion. Just imagine what we could do, what good we could do with that money if it wasn't going to them. Secondly, substantial tax relief, which is basically another form of subsidy. In the UK, energy produced from renewables has a tax levy of 45%, but energy produced from fossil fuels has a tax levy of 35%. And that can be avoided if they reinvest it in the oil and gas expansion projects. Well, 91% of it can be avoided. Then thirdly, we've got an endless supply of investor capital. Much of it, again, coming from who? Workers. It's workers' savings. It's from pension funds, basically. So any company would thrive if they had these three benefits, no doubt about it. So this is how I see it, basically. It will only take one of these pillars to wobble, and the whole industry could potentially be on very rocky ground and potentially fail. And there are pressures building. I know it might not feel like it sometimes because there is a barrage of bad news constantly, but there are pressures, and these are the kind of things they don't want us to know. So as we speak, there are thousands of legal cases being brought against big oil for their harms to the environment. On top of that, there are 14,000 legal cases being brought by indigenous communities in the Niger Delta against Shell through the British courts. And a couple of weeks ago, I hope that people saw this news, but if not, this will be good news. The EU passed a law comparable to ecocide, meaning that criminal cases can now be brought against the big polluters, the big slashers, and the big burners. Then there is a bit of an investor rebellion starting to happen. They're starting to see fossil fuel industry as a bit of a risky business, and people are demanding cleaner pensions and bank accounts and greener energy supply. And financial modelling is starting to finally include climate and societal risks as part of the factors that they look at when they are looking to invest their money. And then governments are coming under increasing pressure to drop the subsidies. About 6 or 7 weeks ago, after 27 days of road blocking, Extinction Rebellion in the Netherlands managed to persuade the Dutch government, the Dutch Parliament, to have a debate about ending the fossil fuel subsidy. And they had that debate, and they voted to end the fossil fuel subsidy. And what was incredible about that event, that was incredible enough, but as part of the kind of debate, the truth came out about the level of subsidy. It had been quoted as being 3.5 billion euros. It was actually 46 billion euros annually. And now there is an all-party parliamentary group that are investigating just how racist the environmental emergency is. I attended that inquiry online, and yeah, it was incredible because they talked non-stop about justice for Shell's crimes. That chap up there is Dr. Lazarus Tamana. He's the current president of MOSOP, so the Movement for the Survival of the Ogoni People. And he talked endlessly about, and in detail, about how racism and colonialism has basically enabled the likes of Shell to get away with what they've been doing in Nigeria all these years. It's been central to the injustices and their reckless operations from the Ogoni 9 to the present. And what was very astounding, so I didn't realise until halfway through that session that there was a Q&A. You could actually type in your comments and your questions. So I did that. And thanks to Caroline Lucas for picking that up, because she then read out the statement that I put in there, which was Shell's operations in Nigeria are corporate murder and corporate grievous bodily harm. And she asked the panel to agree to that, and they did. So that's now on the record. I mean, I just don't think that would have happened a couple of years ago. So I do believe that justice for Nigeria is finally coming. And I think the consequences for that injustice will rain heavily on Shell. And I feel that. I feel it in my blood, and I hope and believe it's coming soon. And if we go back to the Ogoni 9, Ken he absolutely believed in the power of community and peaceful resistance. And all of us can have impact, big impact. And the biggest way to do that, actually, there are 3 big ticket items which really will help to end the tyranny of the oil and gas companies. So I'm going to go very briefly through them. First of all, write to your MP and tell them you want them to stop the fossil fuel subsidy. There's an election coming, so they are all ears right now. You'll probably get their attention. Secondly, take a look at what your money is supporting. If you pay into or draw from a pension scheme, ask your provider for a breakdown of the investments and tell them you want to take your money out of fossil fuels. And there are groups across the country campaigning for that. We're one of them. So we run a campaign called SWAP, Southwest Action on Pensions. There are some leaflets around of how you can get involved in that. Then, still to do with money, actually do the same with your bank. So Barclays Bank are Europe's biggest investor in fossil fuel expansion projects. So if you bank with Barclays, please switch. No shame, but now's the time to make a change. You can do it really easily these days. It's not like it was a few years ago. It's dead easy to do. You just go to that website. Again, there's a QR code, there's some information about it. It takes minutes. They will do it all for you. All your direct debits, absolutely everything. Thirdly, change your energy supplier to a company that is 100% committed to renewables. So there's a few here, 100 Green, Ecotricity and Green Energy. And again, it's quite easy to do that now. It's pretty pain-free process. So just to end, the status quo want us to believe that there is nothing we can change, and there is absolutely no point in us even trying to do that. That's what they want us to believe. But I ain't buying that. I really ain't buying that. Along with justice for harms to people and planet, I believe a cleaner, better world is coming. I truly do believe that. And I think together we can make it happen. Thank you.